Israel's parliament has passed the first bill of the controversial judicial reforms that are being pushed by Benjamin Netanyahu's administration. It's called the Reasonableness Bill, and it strips the Supreme Court of the power to declare government decisions unreasonable. The bill was passed on Monday by a vote of 64-0, with all members of the governing coalition voting for it. Now, this is the first key bill of the multi-pronged judicial overhaul plan to be passed by the Knesset. Other elements of the overhaul would give government more control over the appointment of judges, as well as remove independent legal advisors from ministries. The Reasonableness Bill was passed despite massive protests in Israel against it. Thousands took to the streets across the country, blocking highways, clashing with the police. Israeli police said that at least 19 people were arrested on Monday. And as demonstrations continued, a video that is now being circulated online shows how a vehicle plowed into a crowd of protesters. At least 3 people were wounded. Police say they arrested a suspect in his 20s. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu defended the reforms as a necessary democratic step. However, concerns over the reforms have been raised even by Israel's allies. The U.S. State Department called the vote in Israeli parliament unfortunate and encouraged the government to reach a broad consensus with the opposition.
With respect to the vote in the Knesset today, as we've said before, as a lifelong friend of Israel, President Biden has publicly and privately expressed his views that major changes in a democracy should be, if they're going to be enduring, must have as broad a consensus as possible. It was unfortunate that the vote today took place with the slimmest possible majority. We understand talks are ongoing and likely to continue over the coming weeks and months to forge a broader compromise, even with the Knesset in recess, and we will continue to support the efforts of President Herzog and other Israeli leaders as they seek to build a broader consensus through political dialogue.
If the proposed overhaul passes, these changes would cause the biggest shakeup to Israel's judiciary since its founding in 1948. Israel's no written constitution, but only a set of quasi-constitutional basic laws, and due to this, supporters of the reform claim that the Supreme Court is relatively more powerful and that this is problematic. Critics say if the proposed bills are passed, the government would have more control over what goes on in the judiciary and the top court, including the appointment of judges. Israel's internal divide is expected to get deeper after the bill was passed on Monday. Those who oppose it have warned of labor strikes, shutdowns, and have even refused to serve in the military. The country's umbrella labor union have made preparations to declare a strike. Petitions have been filed in the Supreme Court asking to find the reasonableness law illegal on the grounds that it changes the basic structure of Israeli democracy. Petitioners are also requesting that the top court block the implementation of the law until the court has ruled on it. The Israeli Bar Association is already preparing a legal challenge for the same. The Bar Council is also petitioning the Supreme Court to cancel the reasonableness law. The Bar also warned that it will shut down as an act of protest against the anti-democratic legislative process. Opposition to the overhaul has also reached Israel's defense forces. More than 10,000 Israel Defense Forces reservists will suspend their volunteer reserve duty if the Supreme Court rules the reasonableness law itself is unreasonable. It could trigger a constitutional crisis that has set the government and the court against each other. For more on this, we're now being joined by our correspondent Jody Cohen. Thank you so much for joining us, Jody. What can you tell us about what happened on Monday evening and indeed through the night with the protests? What can be expected today?
Hi, Hem. So the protests went on late into the night. I'm standing by the 531 motorway where, as you saw, someone sped off after running over and injuring 3 protesters who were blocking the road. And in Jerusalem, a protester reportedly used a flagpole to break a car window with a woman and children inside, and both have been held by the police. Now, protesters blocked roads in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Ra'anana, Haifa for some hours. Some protesters clashed with police, and in the latest figures, at least 33 people have reportedly been arrested. The protesters say that the police indiscriminately used water cannons, and the police say that protesters fought them and threw water bottles filled with sand, injuring at least 13 police officers. Now, Tuesday, very early in the morning, some artists hung huge banners on the Ayalon highway in Tel Aviv showing fists to indicate the ongoing protests. And the Israeli newspapers published black front pages to indicate that they felt yesterday was a black day. The Israel Medical Association has called for a 24-hour doctor's strike only dealing with emergency cases. The Histadrut labor union said that attempts at a compromise that we saw yesterday failed due to political whims on both sides, and that any further reforms will have grave consequences up to and including a full strike.
Right, absolutely, Jody. That being said, what is likely to happen next politically and legally after the reasonableness bill was voted for in the parliament?
So the Prime Minister, as you said, issued that statement. He said the bill was necessary to allow an elected government to rule and restore a degree of balance between the judiciary and the government. But he also said that they were going to pause on any further legislative proposals until the end of November and invited the opposition to talks to try and seek an agreement. Now, Benny Gantz, who's the largest rival to Netanyahu, he said that the majority in parliament wanted an agreement but were defeated by extreme MPs. And he referred to Ben Gvir and Levin, who threatened to bring down the government if the bill didn't pass. But he also said that the legislation he expects will be erased sooner or later. Now, Yair Lapid, the head of the opposition, he's rejected talks. He says he's going to be petitioning the High Court today, and others have also appealed to the Supreme Court. I've been consulting with senior lawyers this morning who say that the court in that case has two options. They can either affirm the law, which would lead likely to much more protests, or they can strike down the law, which would lead to a standoff between the judiciary and the government.
Right. Well, Jody, thank you so much for bringing us the latest on this. We will, of course, continue to track all the developments very closely.
Thank you.